We're no strangers to overpowered weapons on this channel, and where Elden Ring gives us a plethora of said overpowered weapons, there is a large number of them that tend to go overlooked and therefore may be underrated. And in this video, I'm hopefully going to show you 5 incredible weapons that you maybe haven't used yet that can also deal outrageous amounts of damage. So let's just jump straight into it, as I'll also show you the builds for these weapons so you can have the same amount of fun that I did. So yes, welcome on back to another video, guys. I hope you're all doing well, and of course today we're going to be looking at 5 more builds around weapons that I personally think are a little bit underrated, or at least I don't see a whole bunch of people using them, so I thought I'd make this fun little video to showcase these particular weapons off. Now, one of them is actually a weapon that I have featured in a top 5 before, because the first build in this video is going to revolve around the Dragon Scale Blade. Now, the Dragon Scale Blade has a few unique abilities, both naturally and also with its Ash of War, because upon using said Ash of War, the Ice Lightning, you will then coat this already insane katana with additional lightning damage and also frost proc. And just to be exact, you'll be adding an additional 160 points worth of lightning damage to the weapon, whilst adding an additional 80 points worth of frost proc, which of course in the earlier new game pluses will allow you to proc frost very easily, whilst also adding a very high amount of AR just for the tap of one button. And of course, if you want to be super cool, you can of course have 2 of these at the same time with that effect on both of them, absolutely tearing everything apart. The only downside to this is if you wanted to do that, you do need to go into a new game plus, because this weapon is dropped by the Dragonkin soldier who is residing in the Scarlet Rot Lake. There's also another passive buff that you get when using this weapon, because where katanas aren't usually great against dragons, where they're actually quite heavily resistant to slash damage, the Dragon Blade Katana gets a natural plus 20% boost to damage output against regular dragons and a plus 10% damage boost to ancient dragons. So you are naturally going to be doing more damage against dragons with this particular katana compared to other katanas in the game. And of course, if you do proc the frost, then again you'll be doing an additional 20% worth of damage as your enemy's resistances are debuffed with the frost. And of course, to make this all work together, here are the stats, talismans, and also the wonder physic combination for this particular build. And to save repeating myself for all of the builds, these are all going to be level 150 characters. The gameplay is also going to vary between new game pluses 3 and 6, and if you ever see 33 faith in the build, just know that I am running both Golden Vow and also the Howl of Shibiri as buffs to get the most damage output possible. Of course, if you wanted to lower that to 25 faith and run something like Flame Grant Me Strength instead, just to be a little bit safer, you can do. But this particular build is heavily dex orientated and of course focuses on the DPS side of things, so running things like Millicent's Prosthesis and the Rotten Winged Insignia is going to be absolutely crucial. And with all of that combined, you're going to be able to do the thousands and thousands of damage that you're seeing me deal, obliterating pretty much every boss in sight, and again, having a whale of a time. But we've got 4 more builds to go through, and the next build is going to be around a weapon that you guys might just about recognize, because I'm sure you've heard of the infamous Lightning Perfume Bottle. This thing, during the first patch of the DLC's launch, was an absolute monster, because if you didn't know, Rolling Sparks was a little bit busted and did things like this. Of course, quite rightly, From Software very promptly fixed this issue, making Rolling Sparks work as it was intended, meaning that everybody that was running this kind of build was sadly disappointed. But From Software of course didn't absolutely annihilate the build, they just made it work as it was intended. And the beautiful thing about perfume bottles is they have a very unique running attack, and again, added in the DLC were things like Lada's armor, as well as the Lacerating Cross Tree Talisman, which buffs running attacks, or dash attacks as they're known, meaning that you can still, if you get the timings right and get your positioning right, deal a tremendous amount of damage with every single perfume bottle. But even if you're just focusing on the one, like I was in my case with the lightning bottle, you will still see your enemies get destroyed in literal seconds. And again, here is everything that I was using in this particular build. So like I mentioned, for the talismans, I was using the Lacerating Crossed Tree Talisman, but then we also paired that with the Lightning Scorpion Charm, as well as the Perfumer's Talisman and the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman. Again, where I was using the Lightning Bottle, I did a mix of Faith and Dexterity into this build, so pumping my Dexterity all the way up to 54 and then Faith all the way up to 60, before then running the Lightning Shrouding Crack tier, as well as the Faith Knot tier, just to again get the best base damage possible. And then as long as you're doing the dashing attacks with this, you'll be absolutely fine. Of course, the Perfumer's talisman will only work with really Ashes of Wars that you've got, so Rolling Sparks is still good to be using against bigger enemies, as that line can go through their entire body, hitting their entire hitbox. So that's why it's good to keep that in there. But if you're just going to be making use of the running attacks, feel free to put on something like the Ritual Sword talisman, as that will be a better help, boosting that particular damage even more. But perfume bottles are still really good. They're obviously not quite as broken as they once were before, but they were literally utterly broken to the point where, yeah, something had to be done. And now they're actually still really useful if you use them in the right way. It's just, again, making sure you use them in the right way. But saying that, a brand new weapon that we haven't necessarily featured on this channel yet is actually the one that I want to be talking about next, because the next build is going to revolve around the Rotten Great Axe, a colossal weapon that tends to get overlooked quite badly because it does have a bit of a weird scaling. Although it scales best with dexterity, you actually need 30 strength in order to wield it, which tends to put a lot of people off. But if you remember that in Elden Ring, when you two-hand a weapon, you get 50% of your strength stat applied to your character. You can actually use this weapon with only 20 strength in your build, because like I say, you get 50% extra strength when two-handing it. That way you can then pump the rest of your stats into dexterity and have a really cool, hard-hitting colossal weapon, which comes naturally with one of the higher Scarlet Rot build-ups in the game, again as a natural effect, which can also be infused with other Ashes of War. So guess what? You can also apply bleed to this weapon, and even better still, if you add something like Poison Mist or any other poison-based Ash of War, you can also add poison, believe it or not, to this weapon. So essentially with this build, we're getting Poison Mist and putting it on this weapon, and also making it a bleed variant. So we've got Scarlet Rot going on, poison going on, and also bleed going on top of a colossal weapon, which of course does an insane amount of stance damage to go along with its already naturally good damage too. And in order to get this, you do need to defeat the Rotten Duelist that's located just here in the Consecrated Snowfields, sort of like a tad northwest to Ordina, which is like the town on the way to the Haligtree. But once you defeat said Duelist, you obtain that weapon, and then you can run this particular build with it, which will be how you'll deal the same damage that I'm doing on screen. And again, we put 20 strength in this build just so that we can definitely use it whilst we're two-handing. So again, that is pivotal. Just know whenever we're using this weapon, we are going to be two-handing it. So talismans like the two-handed talisman are going to be absolutely crucial for this, but we can also make use of the axe talisman because the charged heavies again are going to hit like an absolute truck, and we can run both of the exaltations, both rot and also bleed, to give us a plus 20% buff whenever a bleed or any of the rot or poison procs occur, and then finish the build off with the dexterity knot tier as well as the spiked crack tier to again just make this build utterly devastating. The only thing I will say is, of course, this build is not as effective against bosses like the Putrescent, Elden Beast, and of course Melania, who are all going to be resistant to at least poison and also rot. Of course, Melania can still be bled, but the other two bosses are immune to everything. So if you wanted to, you can change the Poison Mist for something like Cragblade, but for the other 95% of the game, this weapon and this build will just absolutely wreck. But now it's time for our fourth build of the video, and this is one that revolves around the Zamor Curved Sword. Now I know you guys are probably aware of just how good this weapon can actually be, because again, whereas a Curved Greatsword, it has a very nice natural moveset, but it's also been buffed specifically with its Ash of War, the Zamor Ice Storm, with some items from the DLC, and this weapon just got even stronger, again, with all of the recent changes to the game. And again, just quickly to show you how you get this, you do need to go through the giant conquering hero's grave to fight the boss within said hero's grave, which is going to be a Zamor, and upon defeating said boss, you'll then get this weapon and also the armor set to drop. So if you want to wear the matching set, feel free to do so. But the weapon itself is a somber weapon and will come with a natural 65 points worth of frost proc per hit. But the Ash of War is kind of the star of the show because Zamor Ice Storm does a ridiculous amount of ice proc, but it also does a very high amount of stance damage And also, whereas a whirlwind effect, it can push away or stun humanoid enemies, so against Melania, like we just mentioned a moment ago, this might be a much better option, but essentially this weapon will mean that you've always got your enemies frost procced, especially if you're using the Ash of War, and actually has a very nice capability of stance breaking enemies too, meaning that if you're a much more skilled player than me, you can probably deal a lot more damage with it, annihilate those humanoid bosses and just breeze through some of the more annoying fights, like Lada's fight in the DLC for instance, and just have a whale of a time whilst you do so. And again, in order to mimic the damage and the amount of fun that I was having, here are the stats and everything that you need, including the talismans and the wonder physic. And as you can see, as with the scalings on the weapon, we did delve into both strength and dexterity. Of course, dexterity is a slightly higher scaling value, hence why we leaned a little bit more into dex. But again, just to be abundantly clear, the Ash of War is purely magic based damage, but it does scale with the weapon scaling too. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the new talismans we're using is the Enraged Divine Beast talisman, as that boosts storm damage by 10%. And again, Samurai Storm is a storm attack, which we can of course pair with the Shard of Alexander and also Millicent's Prosthesis and the Ritual Sword talisman, just to again boost our dexterity as well as any kind of like DPS moves we're doing with the base moveset of the weapon itself, before then pairing the Strength Knot tier with the Stone Barb Crank tier, which again will help with the heightened stance damage of the Ash of War. But if you wanted to, because again we're mentioning the Ash of War is pure magic damage, you can run the Magic Shrouding Crack tier instead, because of course the Stone Barb Crack tier only lasts 30 seconds, so if you wanted something that lasts a little bit longer, especially if you're in your later New Game Pluses, swap those around, see what one's best fit for you. But I went with the Stone Barb Crack tier just because I enjoy breaking my enemy stances. But I'll be completely honest, whichever one you decide to choose, you'll be on for a winner, as the Zambor Curve Sword is an absolute beast. And also post-edit Jazza here, just reminding you that you can also wear the Divine Beast Helm to increase the storm damage by 4% as well, whilst giving you +3 in strength and dexterity. Just know if you are using the helm that you're seeing me use in the footage, you will actually heal less with your flasks too, so if you want the trade-off for extra damage, but for less heals whenever you use your healing flask, also feel free to run the Divine Beast stuff. But with that said, this leads us on to our final build of the video. And this is actually a weapon that's going to be a little bit harder to obtain, because it does require you to farm it from a particular enemy in the DLC, and it also only supposedly has a 3% drop rate. And of course the weapon I'm talking about is the Golem Fist. And just to quickly show you where you do need to farm it, like I say, it is in the DLC, more specifically in Telu's Ruined Forge, which is just about here. And you do need to farm the golems that are basically using this weapon, so throwing like the rocks at you, which is actually their fists. So definitely make sure that you increase your arcane and bring things like the Silver Scarab Talisman as well as the Silver Pickled Foul Feet, as you're going to need the best discovery possible, because like I say, it's a 3% chance of getting this. But once you have it, you've got a very unique, basically Smith script weapon, where when using a charged heavy attack, you will do that move of throwing rocks at your enemies, which again are actually your fists. But the unique thing about this is if you actually use that attack right on top of your enemies, you're going to hit your enemies 4 times, once for each projectile, so 2 projectiles get shot, and also once for every time with your actual fists. Because you're hitting your enemies 4 times in very quick succession, if you apply things like bleed onto this weapon, you can proc that very, very easily. The only downside and the reason why not many people use this is because the stamina that's taken up doing said charged heavies is absolutely huge. But if you just pick your moments and use it when it's safe to do so, again, you're gonna proc bleed, frost, whatever ailment you have on the weapon almost every time, guaranteed. Just of course put on whatever Ash of War that you can, because unfortunately this weapon doesn't come with a long list of infusible Ash of Wars. I actually went with Horalu's Earthshaker, just again to have like a huge AoE effect or like a high damaging move against NPCs. So again, pick and choose whatever Ash of War you want on it. I highly recommend that you also infuse this with bleed, because if you do so, you can run these stats, talismans, and wonder physic combination to match the damage output that we were doing. So again, splitting our damage mainly between arcane and strength, because where it's bleed affinity, we'll be getting the most bleed possible as well as the best AR possible with these stats. And again, the charged heavy attack does proc both Millicent's Prosthesis and the Winged Insignias, so again, having both of those on will be extra handy. And we also got the Axe Talisman and the Spiked Crack Tier in here too. Just one thing to note, this will only buff the damage with the actual physical fist. It will not buff the amount of damage of the projectiles that come out, but the sort of like follow up or follow through with the fist will be buffed with both of those items. And then of course we can run the Lords of Blood's Exaltation to help with the bleed procs, and I went with the Strength tier in there as well. And again, one other key thing to note with the stats is that it does require 11 intelligence and 11 faith to use it. Like I said in the beginning, I typically run a lot of faith to run both Howl Shibiri and Golden Vow, so I didn't have to worry about the faith, but all of these builds are using a Wretch starter class, so just make sure you put 1 point into intelligence to be able to actually use the weapon in the first place, or whatever starter class you're using. Like I say, just make sure that you're meeting those requirements, and then just like the others, once you've culminated all of this together, you'll be good to go and have an absolute blast just seeing your enemies' health bars just absolutely deplete every time that you get to pull one of those charged attacks off. Just again, be mindful of your stamina because you will be depleting basically 80% of it every time you do a charged heavy. So just bide your time with this one, be a little bit more patient, and a weapon that maybe not everybody was using can be outright ridiculously overpowered. That is going to be the end of this video, guys. Hopefully I've shown you some builds or weapons at least that maybe you haven't used before. We of course have used things like the Dragon Scale Blade and also the Lightning Perfume bottles before, but things have changed throughout the game, and again that build has been slightly adapted, so it is still something new for you guys because, as I mentioned with the lightning build, you probably haven't used the lightning bottles since they were broken, but they are still really good. So like I say, hopefully I've shown you some really interesting builds. If I have done and you've enjoyed this video, if you don't mind me asking you just to leave a like rating down below, because not only will that help out the channel tremendously, but it genuinely is the fastest and easiest way to let me know that you enjoy these kind of like top 5s or like 5 underrated builds, 5 most powerful build videos, and it also lets me know that you want to see more of them. We are on the road to 40,000 subscribers. We also have a bunch of Night Rain content which I need to obviously condense and make into actual formal guides. So towards the sort of like run up towards Night Rain, I guess, or like the end of April, beginning of May, you can expect to see some Night Rain content from me. I haven't done it yet because it doesn't really make sense considering there's still like 3 months until the game's actually being released. So if you want to stick around for more Night Rain content as well as just more Elden Ring content in general, be sure to subscribe. We also live stream on this channel 3 times a week, so there's a lot to get involved with, so feel free to do that if that sounds like your kind of thing. But I'm gonna leave everything there, so thank you again so much for watching this video. Have fun with these incredible builds, and I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.